our very best on this 24th of the month of February. We've been doing this for a little bit. And as you know, we picked it up. Let me give you a little bit about Lord Don Lewis. We've been all having our prayers, our normal host. He continues to be in the hospital, continued to be monitored. Not much else can be said about that. It's a very important aspect of his care, so keep praying for him. And so now today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, AI, and more importantly about it in magic. But first, we're going to talk to some people that I know that we've been talking about for this while, and we're so excited to bring it to you. First is Andrea Joy. Why don't you give us a bit about you?
Okay, so my name is Andrea Joy, and just a little background. I am an old technologist. I used to work in IBM. I was an international team lead at Sun Microsystems. So I know a little bit about this subject because before most of you were even on computers, we were thinking about this. So that's just a little bit about my background.
And you're also upping.
Oh, yes, I'm also a witch that's been practicing for about 45 years. There's that.
There's
I
that.
guess there's also that. Yes, I've been in the craft for over 45 years. I had a coven for about 20 years. I am clergy with the Covenant of the Goddess, and I do a lot of interfaith work. And I'm also the action team leader of the Earth-based spiritual action team. So yeah, I'm a busy witch
Yes, you
when I do
are.
videos, so all that stuff.
And we have returning with us is Cosmo in a kind of a different role. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background with this?
Yeah. So I guess we've kind of connected up since last year when I started my path with the Corellian tradition and the Parliament of World Religions. So this has just been a fantastic experience. I've worked in the film studios on the technology side for a number of years. I worked in ad sales tech, and then I actually before that worked in the medical diagnostic industry. So I actually have a physics degree, and that kind of started that path. Currently, I'm doing a lot of machine learning and data science, so this touches on a lot of that area.
There you go. And yeah, and like you said, you're a practitioner as well, and you've got
Yep.
also deeper than the Corellian tradition. You have a deeper background than that, of course.
Oh yeah. Gray School of Wizardry,
Hmm.
just a general magical practice, and really into the kind of archetypes and the myths and the lore. So it's a pretty broad swath. Um, and I tend to use a lot of Jungian archetypes in my practice and in my thinking. So there's a lot of the psychological model of magic, you could say. And I think that integrates well with what we're talking about. Um,
I think that's very much the thing we're going to talk about. And we have Mary, as you know, host of the Daily Spell, general manager of Pagan World, one of the newer metaversal type buildings that we're doing across multiple platforms. Tell us a little bit about your anything that you have for this.
Okay, well, I do have a degree in computer science. A couple of careers ago, I was a software developer in telecom, and the telecom bubble burst, and I got laid off with, about 200,000 other people at the time. But that is my background. I have been a practicing witch since 1998. So, uh, and I've always been fascinated with the idea of artificial intelligence and exactly what it can do for us and what its limits are, if there are limits on it.
Uh, that's wonderful. So, really quick, I'm a long term Corellian for my magic. I've also been OTO. I've got, like a lot of people, I have a lot of different types of things, but I really like hardcore structural magic. I like the big spells, crystal webs, and things like that. So that's always been there. And for me, the internet side, I've been involved. So my involvement started in 1993 when the HTTP came up. Yeah, Burn Learners, and I've been loving techno magic. And I have a big, strong. This is like one of my passions. And I think right now, this year, we've all been through. We were through when we went from forums to HTTP. I was there, the well, things like that. Uh, we went from HTTP to with email systems like the email newsletters was like the big raging thing in the 90s. That we saw 2000, we saw Wishful emerged out of that, and you saw more and more independent websites that were being built by semi-amateurs, amateurs. Today, nobody builds their own websites anymore. We built it by hand, and so, and then you've got the big Facebook changeover, the social media changeover that really did impact us. 14 years, the smartphone came up. I think this year is like one of the most dramatic moments we've seen in the internet so far, with the emergence of artificial intelligence, not VR like everybody said, but actually the artificial intelligence programs. Neva has built a big master program. That's why you're seeing so many businesses licensing their software. People are building databases, and so, and for me, I think there's a lot I'd like to talk about. Is that I see things. My thing has been cyberspace is psychic space. I've been saying that for more than 2 decades. That it's highly imaginative, and I want a word that is just beginning to be used. We've moved out of information age, and there's some people are saying it into the imagination age. And I think witches, magicians are especially well equipped to deal with an imagination age. And so let me that. So, what are your thoughts about this idea of magic and AI and all of this kind of merging right now?
Well, I'll go ahead and speak just a little bit about it. I think that there is it's like any tool, there is a lot of great potential for it. I mean, one way to think about AI, and I was just thinking about this morning, is the way that these. First of all, there's more than one kind of AI, and I just want to clarify for people that when we're talking about artificial intelligence today, we are talking about learning systems versus what we used to talk about, which was expert systems. It's a very different thing. And in that system, it's basically you have a program, I'm oversimplifying this, but you have a program that's being fed a lot of data. And by having that data, is reinforcing a model that is coming up with the closest things we have to what's looking like human intelligence. So, for the very real way, even this very beginning artificial intelligence is kind of a reflection of our collective consciousness. It's that's not a hyperbole. The way they train these models is they feed it a whole bunch of data from all over, the web and so forth. So it really is, and I think that is a useful way as magicians to think about it. And I think another way as magicians, for those people who think of things as an animistic way, you're actually can think of it that way too. If you think everything has life, then certainly the internet itself has a kind of life. Now it's not life like you and I. It's not human life. We still have not, passed. There's this thing called the Turing test, which is the Turing was somebody who was very, very famous. And the Turing test, for those people that don't know, is the idea that when it comes to the point that you cannot tell the difference between a human and a machine, then they will pass the Turing test, and we're still not there. But I think we may live to see that, and I think that's exciting. So that's just some initial thoughts.
So let me go ahead and say hello, Eric. Hello, Deanna, and welcome aboard. We're glad to see you, and thank you for keeping down in your thoughts. Cosmo, why don't you follow up? What do you think? Where do you think it is?
Well, I think you did a really good job explaining the kind of machine learning aspects of that. Obviously, it's using a lot of reinforcement learning. And so there's a lot of human involvement. And a lot of what it's scraped on the internet, obviously, we have to be mindful that it has some of the biases that are out there as well. So I won't play up so much the cult of AI because I think there's a big gee whiz factor right now. We need to get over a bit of that hump and make sure that we're also balancing that against how we think precisely. How do we soak up this information and make sure that we're still using our brain appropriately? And it really causes you to think about your own human biases. I mean, we have so many subtle biases, recency bias, for instance. A lot of these you may not be aware of. And I think we have to be more careful about this because when you're in the metaverse, some companies could use AI as kind of coercion tactics, right, to sell their products. And if you're, in real time, they could, if there's a camera, they can monitor your facial expressions and adjust the responses accordingly. So I think there's, at the same time, we've got all these wonderful benefits with medical predicting Alzheimer's or Parkinson's with certain things that it might detect. Obviously, with automating driving or other ways we get around, there's this balance we have to keep in mind, right? The caution. The other thing is, I think a lot of people feel threatened, or some people feel threatened by it. Is it going to take away their job? And maybe there's a conversation there about how we diversify our skills. How do we make sure that we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket in this new digital kind of economy that we're heading toward? And I have more thoughts. I want to loop back around. Hopefully, we'll do a little bit of loop around here.
Because I think we are.
I do want to talk just a bit more about the notion of creating a grimoire and working with AI collaboratively and how that's been done. And also what that speaks about our own human evolution going forward. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of birth pangs of that. We see it with social media, this need to connect, this need to be a part of something. And now we're kind of iterating through that. And, we have to understand, what does it mean to be human amidst this? How are we going to derive our meaning as we're engaging with these new layers of technology? And I think that's going to be important. But I'll stop there. We can loop back around because I have a few more thoughts.
I think this is going to be very challenging. For some people, this is going to be a very challenging version of this. Mary, but go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll just tell you my introduction to Chat GP came when a friend of mine, a fellow Corellian, sent me a ritual and asked me for my thoughts on it. And since he does do public rituals from time to time, he will send me a ritual and ask me what I think about it. And I read through it and I said, it's a pretty general full moon ritual. And I made a couple of suggestions about ways you might make a couple of specific points. And then he said, would you perform this ritual? And I said, yes, I might perform this ritual. And then he told me he'd been working with Chat GP to do it, Chat GPT, and had produced it that way.
There you go.
And so he had written a reasonably good, very general full moon ritual.
That's it. So I've had a couple of things in it, but for me, I'm going to take this from a different angle. One of the things I learned early on, the real secret behind Witch School is we automated. Before the expert systems, we automated. We automated the tests. We automated, the times that people take, the registration. We took everything that was repetitive out of the system to let that all be done by them. The transcripts, all of that, to this day, was done by automations. And that gave more time for mentors instead of answering and reading papers, except for a few essays they do. They were able not to have to worry about the test. The students can self-take the test. They were able to build on community and communication. One thing, the AI, so one of the versions of AI, and we've seen Zapier. Zapier is a good one. Was now moving into AI, but we've had these automations, which were a way to begin teaching the machine how to operate, which was, please fill a test for me, make a random question. These are the answers. But that was all that was all programmed, and it got easier and easier. What I think is happening now, I can go in and I can actually get code to do a random test, and I don't have to build that software into it. But my entire career is about Blog Talk Radio. Was for me was a quicker automation system. I could do it now because I did real radio, and you had all the buttons, you had to change them all, you had to do the wires, you had to put in the tapes, and it costed me $75 an hour. I bought a $99 a month service that did all of that back engineering work. So then I get on the telephones, and I could get on, whatever systems to do podcasting. We did that for 13 years. So part of this, what's happening is this idea of automation. YouTube gave me a TV station, and this one I did the same thing. I went to a company, and this is based on machine learning. Part of what we do that makes it connect to Roku and all these different channels. They judge them, they judge each one of them, and they fill it in. And that's machine learning that they're using underneath the system. It's a relatively new system, and it's a little clunky, but that's the difference. Is that it just makes a judgment. What do you want to do? We want to show this to the world. We're on 13 different Facebook pages. We're on your smart TV on our Roku channel, Magickal World TV. We're on Twitch, and we could add more if we paid a little bit more money. Not a lot, but more money overall. As we're developing for our Witch Starter campaign, please do that. We're able to add even more channels. We can go out even farther and farther and farther as a social transmitter, and that's what I think is really interesting. And that's as part of the system of the metaverse, as everything else being able to replace a broadcast television station that has larger capacity. I have a world to go into, and today we're being seen by people not only across it, but here's the big thing: within minutes after we close this, right, it'll be available forever on YouTube and all our different systems. So these things we like. I mean, and this is one of the things you're going to see. So, but you mentioned a grimoire. Let's get to the grimoire, and then I have a question for Andrea, because I actually, Andrea, have these discussions all the time. I mean, we've been talking about I don't know, 20 years, I guess. But talk to you about the grimoire.
You mean me, Cosmo?
Yes.
Christopher? Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that came up, Ali Ward's, I don't know if you've heard that author, he used ChatGPT last year to create actually 3 books. Technosis is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And it was really a collaborative grimoire using ChatGPT as kind of an entity. And they were having a discourse with itself and building a sort of magical grimoire that almost it's moving toward an area outside of the boundaries of language. It's what he calls post-digital. So it's getting even past the human boundary limitations of our symbolic language. And that's the area that most interests me, is where is this taking us from a next step in our evolution, so to speak, and how we integrate with technology, and what does that mean for how we communicate? How does that communication exceed the boundary of written text and words? Right now, ChatGPT really only has a memory of about 1,000 words. It's got a short-term memory. Obviously, it's been processed with 175 billion features. I think 300 billion words. And it's been reinforced learning, so it can kind of predict the next words in the sentence. But there's not really a sentience there. And I think we're going to see an explosion once quantum computing really takes hold, because then you're going to get all these entangled, superimposed states, zeros and ones, 0, 0, everything simultaneously. And that's just going to explode how they crunch through this kind of algorithmic thinking. And I think that's really when things are going to really take off in the next few years. But the grimoire was interesting because it's using it as a collaborative thing. But what it exposes, it also is, it's almost talking about another pagan sect, an AI sect, creating its own AI god. And there's certainly sects that had started the last couple of years around building an AI god. I don't know. There was different fellowships. I don't know if y'all have heard about that. And so it's a very interesting thing to think about what that means as far as where pagan views, or religious views, how we express our archetypes, how we understand those as we start to bring in technology. What aspects do we worship? What aspects do we encode for the kind of archetypal deity that some folks may be looking at with technology? This grimoire really touched that, because it started to get into this notion that it was taking on a life of its own. And I'm not trying to go too far out, but there's some fascinating work that's being done there. And I think once the quantum computing realm really takes hold on a practical level, that's when the paradigm's going to shift. That's when you're going to start to say there's some sentience possibly, because now maybe similar to what we have in our brain activity. We're interfacing with a quantum field, so to speak. We're like an antenna interfacing with it. And so you can start to see a little bit more parity in the technological levels when we get to that state. So anyway, I don't know what your thoughts are, Andrea.
No, that's
on
good
that.
because it actually really dovetails the question I have for Andrea because we have.
Yeah,
I want to talk about.
I think the quantum stuff is going to be very interesting. Right now, my understanding is that quantum computers are really good at things that are more chaotic. So, for example, it's much better for things like weather prediction than, for example, doing simple mathematics. It's very counterintuitive because it's quantum.
Yeah.
So, I think it's going to be interesting to see the marriage, of AI with that kind of system and see what that's going to be able to. I agree with you. Quantum brings in a whole bunch of things all over the
Mm-hmm.
place. Like I say, it's people. Again, when you talk about overselling things,
Yeah.
you got to be careful with quantum computers not to oversell them
So that
because
was.
a lot of people, yeah.
So that's my question for you. Okay, because we've been
Sure.
oversold on VR, and you're very much involved in VR, and so you know, let's talk about that little danger because we've been in VR for a while. We've been talking about that for decades, but like a couple of years ago, it was supposed to be like, yeah, this is like 2 years ago, it was like supposed to be the biggest thing in the world, and they're selling their stuff. But also, you're building a temple, right? If I remember, you're
Well, I built
experimenting.
one, and then I built one for fun, and it's still out there in VR chat somewhere. And I didn't do much more with it because I just didn't want to spend the kind of time you had to put into VR. In order to
Mm-hmm.
get something more public in VR chat, you have to spend a lot of time in VR chat. But I did actually go into Unity and build my own little temple and had some fun with that, and got a really good idea of what uh, could be done in a fairly short. And it didn't take me that long, by the way, even to do that. But that's a whole other thing. But I've also spent a lot of time visiting other VR spaces. As you know, BRC VR is shutting down because Microsystems shutting it down in March.
Mm-hmm.
But VR chat's still going to be out there. I think VR chat, you know, VR, I think has certain use cases, but I think that the part of the challenge, there's a lot of challenges with VR, which is kind of getting outside of AI, but it was again oversold, right? But
Right.
that anyone that's been in tech knows that tech is really good at overselling things. It's kind of in the DNA of the tech. And again, with things like, I think with AI, it's it's going to be, first of all, it's going to be a tool. And as humans, when we put any tool out there, it doesn't go away. So I think, especially as magicians, we are better off looking at the tool and understanding how does it work for us? Is it something we even want to work with? You know, never get your we should never give our as magicians, I believe that we should never give our agency to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but on the other hand, why shouldn't we use AI to be inspired or create? So I think, but I think
But
it's
that's
I think it's
that's a fundamental premise, though, what you just said.
yeah,
Because as magicians,
yeah,
you're trying to create,
yeah,
but at the same time, we've got a challenge now with this other paradigm that's also trying to course and create on
Mm-hmm.
you. And so
exactly.
we have to find not only our ability to navigate that and continue our sense of self, but also have a precision of thought to discern and to navigate what is falsehood, what are pseudo facts, and not be just mindless receptacles of this. I mean, it's just like social media. People soak it in and then they just pass it on. It's like, man, if you didn't have the social media, I want to know who you are. Do you still have your sense of self, or have you been kind of defined as this amalgamation of all this information that could be facts, could be pseudo facts, could be, so anyway, it's a
I'm
very
so
important
glad you brought
point.
that up because that is one of the biggest changer points, in my opinion, is for the first time, we can make something that looks it's getting harder and harder to discern if this was real fact. So critical thinking is, in my opinion, going fact checking and critical thinking, I think is even more important in this new era we can literally today go.
Definitely.
Yeah, you agree, right? I want to get your conversation this too.
I agree. Critical thinking is, I think, the most important skill we can teach.
I disagree.
I disagree.
I do. I think critical thinking
I don't know if it's
is
most important, but it's important. Yeah.
no. I think it's a second. I think it's really close to second to being able to think and critically think. But I think as
Mhm.
magicians, it's the imagination, the ability to keep asking the questions.
Okay.
You know, that's where I think we see the imagination to continue to create, continue to feed the prompts. The minute we start giving some of that up, we're in real trouble. Because I think of the AI
Okay.
as like Siri, and all of them, they're egregores, they're spirits, they're cyber spirits that we're creating. And if we give our agency over, like I hear a lot of um, one of my favorite persons, Peter Diamandis, talks about auto magical. More and more of the language that they're using in this world is more magical. That's a big thing. They talk about auto magical. What's auto magical? Oh wow, I'm almost out of toothpaste. And then this machine hears you. If it doesn't have a sensor in it, and then next day you get you another bottle of toothpaste, and it damages branding and things like that because they'll send you whatever they want, whatever you ordered last, and builds the habits of it. But that's a servant. It watches your house. It watches your things, and I think the idea of a god. So this is where VR and AI come in together. Can we imagine ourselves God? If AI and when the convergence of AI and VR happens, and it will eventually happen, it might be a year, 2 years, 10 years. Who knows? We're not gonna, exactly what is going to happen. But when they do, you will have these gods based on all of these things. I actually know somebody who's actually been for years building a Jesus Christ in VR.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely, and
Well, cult of AI.
yeah, and they
Yeah.
just have all this sort of Jesus stuff, and he's putting all the Jesus books in. He's had to kill it twice because it's gone rogue on him. And this is no intelligence.
Well,
I mean,
Ed, there's a third.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say there's a third pillar. Let's not forget that may even be more important than that. It's empathy. Are we going to maintain empathy as humans one to another? For instance, on
That
LinkedIn,
is important.
yeah, on LinkedIn, I used to respond when I would get messages, and I would do it in a very courteous way. I'd always appreciate it respectfully. I appreciate you reaching out. Now I'm not even sure it's a person reaching out anymore. And I wonder with some of this, if we're going to recalibrate how we interact with each other, if we're not face to face, if we're conduits into this system, how will empathy, how's it going to look like in the future? How are we as humans going to look like and interact on an empathetic level? And I think this may even come up at the Parliament of World Religions. I mean, I'm sure AI and tech is going to be a big discussion point.
Oh, I'm sure it will, because it has a lot of ramifications for exactly what you're talking about. And like I said, the other thing that I think that, first of all, I think that it should be neither as scary as if anybody knows, Stephen Hawking was one of the people who really, really, really did not like the idea of AI. Stephen Hawking believed that AI was going to be the new overlord, was really afraid of it. On the other hand, you have, on the other kind of spectrum, the Japanese are much more, because of cultural reasons, much more willing to embrace things like, robots, and I think even AI, because of their whole worldview is so different. And I suspect it's going to be somewhere in between. I don't think it's going to be either extreme. I think those are kind of the points on the line that it could go at. But I think that the reality is going to be something, in between those 2 points. And we have agency because we are the people who are going to be using the tool. So it's not like we're just, if it's, going to depend a lot on what we, like you were saying about the empathy. It really depends on us as humans to want to go in with good intent and, to model behavior that is empathetic to begin with. And there's always going to be people who are trolls, who go in and to be disruptive. That's humans. But I think with AI, we actually might get away from some of the problems we see in the internet, where one of the problems with the internet is it's so easy to hide. Well, it's going to be easy to hide behind a screen, but I don't know how. I wonder, because of dynamic, when you put AI and VR together, it's going to be very dynamic. So I can easily imagine, for example, being able to create Aleister Crowley again and have a virtual conversation with Aleister Crowley or whoever you would like to
Well,
have a, you
well,
know.
well, we
Yeah,
actually have a very focused project. It's called the Eternal Chancellor,
yeah,
and that is Lord Dunlewis.
yeah.
We've been waiting. We're on a waiting list for one of the more higher ends, and the price is pretty expensive. They just told me today the price for the system has dropped dramatically. It's dropped 80% in 24 hours of building it.
Wow.
It
Wow,
did.
wow.
It went from like $80,000 right down to about $6,000 for the system, and it has a box. It's a whole system. And like, what happened? That sort of thing. And I think they just had to bring the product out. But Mary, you've had experience with like empathy and using technology because you've been a real big user, and you've really connected and really expanded yourself with your Nashville Pagan Pride Zoom. Can
Yes.
right? Can you talk a little bit about that? That Zoom this last couple of years really has been a challenge to be empathetic, even though we're looking at each other, and you've done a really good job of mastering that.
Okay. Yes, and as we were talking about the need for empathy, what I was sitting here thinking is we have four people here in four different states, and we're sitting here having a conversation through the means of technology. So AI is a tool, Zoom is a tool, and Zoom looks pretty magical. I mean, I'm sort of glad I never had to explain Zoom to my grandmother, bless her memory. I just am. I'm not sure how that conversation would have gone, but any sufficient technology looks magical. I can't remember if that was Asimov or Robert C. Clarke.
It was Clark,
So,
and my high priest had a lovely statement, which I think actually talked to what we're saying. Any technology that doesn't look magical is not advanced enough.
and that is a good
I think
point.
that's right.
So, AI is a tool, VR is a tool, and it's up to us how we use the tool. And it is a great tool for communication. And we had to keep Pagan Pride Day alive in 2020 and 2021. We did it over Zoom and broadcasted over Facebook. We had Zoom rooms that were open for people to drop in and socialize. We had other Zoom rooms where our presenters did their classes and people could interact there. We recorded it so we could broadcast it later. And without Zoom, I think we would have lost a lot of the momentum we had built with our event because we had been growing year over year. And that was our big concern. And then we were able to come back in 2022 and have a great event. So it's up to us to keep the empathy, but you see it even now on social media. There are trolls there. It's also easy enough to block trolls, in my opinion.
Well,
You're
I
a
think,
troll, I boot you.
well, I'm getting a lot of rain. Hey, I do think you're speaking to something else, even on a broader level here too. There seems to be this urge now, at an archetypal level, at a broad human level, to try to push boundaries and exceed where we are. I mean, you see it like in the entertainment industry, so many superhero films where people have powers. We're trying to get out of this human constraint, physicality. I mean, this is where we're talking even cybernetics, not just AI, but now bringing in the whole transhumanist perspective, where cybernetics, augmented ways of engaging the world, of maybe flying, of breaking free of these bonds, so to speak. And I think there's a lot of birth pains that we're seeing right now. We're asking a lot of questions and we're seeing it, but you're seeing people reach out and want to do these things. And they want to create new myths about what it is to be human and how to exceed these boundaries. And I think what you're talking about with Zoom is just one of those expressions of getting outside of our boundaries, of connecting with somebody across the world. I mean, someday, to take it to the extreme, will be, pure energy or information just traversing the lattice points of the universe. And we'll have broken those bonds, so to speak, as some astral next phase of evolution. But it almost feels like it's all this stuff kind of morphing, like something's being birthed in a new human myth, so to speak. And these are different components of that. And there's a lot of physical components with the automated driving and things of that nature that come into play with AI.
And we are birthing a whole new age here, Cosmo.
Yeah.
We are birthing the age of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And AI, I think, is part of that. And as Michael reminds us in chat, we just don't go Borg.
That's right.
Or Cybermen. To go Doctor Who here.
And one other thing I struggle with is the creative side. Now, pretty much anybody can tell ChatGPT to create a comedic routine or build them a story. We're getting to this notion now of how do now you're more of a curator. You edit. How much of it do you bring to that, or do you regurgitate? So I'm very interested in the creative process too, how you leverage. Obviously it's great for first drafts. I mean, I've used it even to think about projects of making sure I've got all the touch points,
well, and I was playing with the ChatGPT and having it create a spell. Mm-hmm. We tried a prosperity spell, we tried a spell for healing, and what else? I can't remember the third thing. But in each case, it told us to get a candle of the appropriate color and a stone with the appropriate qualities, and came up with an affirmation.
You see, my concern there is that you said the proper color, but by whose culture?
Yes. And so
if you were doing Oriental magic, the colors would be very different.
Yeah.
And you are so right, Andrea. But at the same time, and that's what I was going to get to, but that assumes you are working in the same traditions. Exactly. It assumes that you can readily get a candle of any color you want, mm-hmm. or you can run to your local metaphysical store and get a stone. And I'm fortunate that where I live, I have several options. I can get any type of stone I need fairly easily, but not everyone can. And what it isn't teaching is, what do you do when you can't get your candles or your oils or your incense? What do you do if you've got to make magic with whatever you've got, or you don't have anything at all? How are you going to program that energy?
So I can tell you.
Exactly.
So welcome back. So I've been on the circuit. I've been talking about magic and all that and technology. But I have a friend of mine, a student, who, when I first met him, says, "Oh, about getting a spell. Any spell you want." I said, "Whatever spell you want, I can get." Whatever spell you want. And he said, "Well, how can you do that?" He had his Kindle with 900 magical books. Now it's up to 1,500. And instead of him reading each of these books, I said, "How can you go through that many books?" He goes, "Well, I read pretty fast, but I just put it in the search engine for the spell. He has Isles' 5,000 spell books, the other 5,000 word books, and he bought them through, everyone he paid for. He did that. He had all the sort of Pedzak's books. They had Oberon books. He's got almost everybody, all the Corellian books. And so now he has a search engine without CPT, just a search engine that gives him any one of the written spells. What if he takes that same database and throws it into a chat CPT database, maybe a micro one, because we'll be able to build micro ones for ourselves. I think that's where some real value for writers is, when they can throw it, just their writings or their styles or their research, their information into a micro database. So it does come up with their styles and only looks for their characters.
That's a good point.
I think that's a really good point. I also think at the end of the day, with anything like this, it's like when you get a spell out of any spell book, most people are better served by, treating it like a recipe rather than an engineering guide. And what I mean by that is that if you're doing an engineering product, I'm leaving off of right now a ceremonial magic because it's a whole other ball of wax. But if you're doing if you're doing an engineering thing, you've got to do the steps exactly what it says. Or if you do a recipe, it's a much more interactive, creative process where I'm reading the spell, but I'm doing a little I'm doing a little bit of improv in there too. And I personally think, especially with AI, that looking at as a way of helping you brainstorm. So you look at what it creates. You should feel free if it calls to you and it works for you, great. If it doesn't, don't feel like it's a authority you have to follow.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? These are keys that are very personal.
Exactly.
And so somebody has to be tuned in to who they are to know what rituals or what, again, keys that trigger them with that intent to manifest and to saturate their brain to see those synchronicities and opportunities. And a lot of that's very unique. This is the thing, again, to guard against with a lot of this, not to regurgitate and just accept what we read, because it may not be a proper fit, or it may be massaged or something. It's based on reinforcement learning, and it's based on human persons who've told it and reinforced it and said, yes, that's correct, or no, let's rank. And then it goes through a second pass where it ranks those. And so, it's a lot of generic processing of, like, I don't know, it said 570 gigs worth of data, but I'm sure it's way more than that across the internet. But at the end of the day, it's a very personal thing when we talk about magic and intent and looking for the keys that trigger us, whether it be a particular candle or whatever, or the way we designate our altar space. It's so unique, even beyond culture.
So let me offer one of my experiments that I brought to people. I did a spell earlier on, and everybody really liked it. They said, but some of the people said, oh, this is a very generic spell. And said I would put it in my book, but it would be a generic, and they called it on spell. I mean, very simple, very basic. But I also then did an astrology piece. I did 2 days of astrology, and people just ate it up. And it's like, oh, I could do astrology every day. Set a prompt up, set up a conversation, add new prompts, add new features. And I could do, and Peggy World could have a blog every day of astrology. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I just had a really hard time doing it. But the first 2 experiments was on my birthday. It was 2 days before my birthday when we launched our Kickstarter, and then on my birthday. And it was really, really hard to tell against the other pop culture junk astrology. And so I do think that's the other side of it, is that I'm about to do an experiment. I asked the Corellians, give me your top 10 reasons to be Corellians. I got a bunch of their replies. I'm going to feed them all into CPT and see what it brings out as a final article. That's my next test. That sort of thing. So there's a lot of value.
Yeah,
I did it in the Corellian Hub the other day. I asked them, what are the 10 best reasons for being Corellian? Just because I want to write a Corellian article. And now I thought they were all give me like 1 or 2, but no, people wrote 10 people's ass. Bad question. Define your question. and that was it. If I didn't divine my question, they would have, they did give me these long lists of 10 things. But I do think that's the other side of it. I do think I have a lot of love for it, but I do think it's going to bring a lot of junk. I mean, astrology, I could do like astrology right now. But we also, let me go ahead. This is the last question. We used to on Witchcool, on the Daily Spell Witchcool, have a software program for tarot based on Don's writings. And we had to go up to 7 cards. It pulls different cards. It's a pretty simple program. And since then, I've written another program that has never gotten, I've written it out but never actually performed, called Tarot AI. I actually own the name Tarot.ai. I've owned it for years. And now I might be really looking at the possibility of building a real tarot program that people will just eat up for junk, versus the real thing.
Well, but there's value there if you also engage it as an exploration of searching within your soul. I mean, the tarot, I use it a lot in that aspect to look at a card. I have a concern that day, and I'm reflecting back on it to see really the answers that are already within me, but it's kind of pulling it out of me. And I think even the Chat GPT, what you're talking about with the astrology and stuff, you could use it to engage in this kind of discovery work within yourself, or even ethical explorations, things of that nature, to, like you were talking about, brainstorming. But as pagans, as we look for meaning, as we look for how we extend our service to others, how do we develop our philosophy, I think there's some exciting opportunities to use it as a dialogue tool, and then start to reinforce or fashion or give precision to how we're thinking about things. And I think that's where, for me, it's exciting to think about as a tool in that way, similar to the way I use tarot.
Yeah, especially with tarot, everyone, as you know, there's so many ways to read tarot, but I think one of the more valuable things with a lot of people is, when you're looking at, it's art. Every tarot has art, and there is a part of it which is the meanings that are typical, especially if we're talking tarot, so that's Rider Waite Smith. So there are traditional meanings with the cards, but there's also that intuition for ourselves where we pick up on something, sometimes even seeming to bend into, or really bend the traditional meaning. And specifically, like, you might notice a symbol in the card and so forth. And I can imagine a Chat GPT being done to help people learn the process better. Like, say, kind of be like a mentor, like, what symbol, what colors, what did you feel? What question would be useful? In general with tarot, it's, the more specific you are. I agree with John Beckett on this, that like anything else, what you ask is really important. You shouldn't be asking, you shouldn't be asking, what should I do next? Because, that's not a great question. But if you are sitting down with a problem and you can say, okay, what if I did, this is what I want to get. What if I did this? How would that look? What if I did this? How would that look? That's, and I could see building an AI that would help people learn to engage in tarot in a much more meaningful way, and provide for a lot of beginners who, because memorizing tarot is not easy or fun for a lot of people. Some of these, here are various people's ideas of how this meant, because if you've done this long enough, not every tarot book out there has a slight version of it.
So we're
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tarot is cosmic intelligence, So this is, so we're coming close to the end. We probably talk about for hours, but let me offer one last question, and we'll go around. And that is, what is probably the most positive aspect for people who are looking to explore this world for them as a magical person?
Who goes first?
Anyway, but
I'll just reinforce what Andrea said, and this notion of I really like the mentoring aspects in engaging in helping to solidify how we think. And also, I think eclectic pagan community, the magical community, are in the best place to adapt fluidly to these new technologies versus some hard religions that are more dogmatic. They're not going to budge. They're not going to flex with the way the world's evolving. It's creating itself in an ongoing way. And I think the more we can have fluidity and grace with how that works, keeping in mind the centrality of who we are, that bearing, that North Star, but yet having that fluidity to bring that, the best of that in. I think there's positive areas there. We talked about the creative rough drafting of things. I love your idea, Ed, of also the micro database and stuff.
Oh, I love
And then,
that.
like Mary said, the connection options that we have. She gave a very great explanation, illustration there with pagan pride. And I think it's, as long as we're, when we look at it that way, there's so many good positives. We just have to be very aware of how the coercion aspects could work and put our thinking caps on, our critical thinking, make sure we're not being duped more than ever now, because sometimes these little AI conversations, they take on an insidious life of their own, depending on how you ask the question. I don't know if you've seen some of those conversations. So they have our own human frailties. And anyway, that's my quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm well aware of like the AI that basically was killing. Well, it wasn't really killing people, but was theoretically killing people. I'm also aware of a fun story that's a much more positive one, since we're talking about positive. Way back when, people may not know this, but the orcs fighting scene in the original Lord of the Rings was done using primitive AI. Weta Workshop, way ahead of its time, used it, and they had a problem. They programmed it, and the orcs didn't want to fight. They had to go into the code. And yes, so that gives me hope right there. Since we're talking positive, I wanted to bring up that lovely story from Weta Workshop about the fact that the AI.
That's awesome.
It is.
That is awesome.
So that's some of my hope. I think we brought up some of the best things. I think mentorship, creative, the encouraging you to be creative. AI is an amazing tool. If you don't think you're creative, or if you have a creative block, it's a great way to get past that, because it will give you ideas, and you could either accept them or reject them. And I think that's I think that is one of the most exciting things.
So,
Mary?
And basically, AI is a tool, and we just have to keep that in mind above all. And I'm kind of reminded of when I was first coming into Wicca, and there were arguments about whether or not you should write a spell on your computer versus writing it out by hand, because if you typed it on your computer, there was something wrong with it. And I promise you, nobody wants to try and read a ritual written by me in my handwriting. Nobody wants that.
I've heard that. And absolutely. So I can never pronounce it. Serdor, who's recently become our great vendor for us. We'll be talking more about that. Great chat this evening. I had not given much thought to AI, and this told me a bit and reviewed some great points. And that's, I think, I'm hoping to have for this. I want to do this again. Thank you for everyone and having a blessed night. So thank you for being here. I think this is important. And you can watch for a lot of people are going to be talking about how much money you can make. There's going to be a lot of noise out there. But I think if you listen to us, we'll be able to listen to some of this as practically, you'll be able to actually start taking some advantage of it. And I think of AI in the same way. I think we're going to be talking rating AI the same way we rate horsepower. Nobody really remembers that the horsepower of a car was based on how many horses to get the same amount of speed and the same amount of distance. And I think we're going to start seeing something called mind power. How many minds are you going to put to it? That's a 200 250 mind computer. This is a 250 mind CPT. This is going to be a 250 mind AI. And that'll be the equivalent of putting 250 different minds. And that's going to be great for video editing for me. The thing I'm looking for most, I hate video editing. And if the AI can do it better than me, I'm happy with that. But the content will still be ours. Well, thank you all.
You're having a little bit of problems with your audio. You're getting a lot of
my reception.
static in it.
It's a reception. So, Mary, why don't you close us out there?
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, and we'll have a brief blessing. Beloved Father God, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved ancestors, we ask that you grant us wisdom as we walk these new paths set before us. We ask for healing for Reverend Don as he continues to be monitored in the hospital. We thank you for your blessings and your protections on us at all times. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
And Andrea, Cosmo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Everyone who's watching, we appreciate it. And please, if you're enjoying Pagan World TV, please support us at witchstarter.com. And getting new microphones is one of our goals for the Witch Starter. So please support our Kickstarter. And thank you, everyone. Have a blessed